There's a common myth about government debt. Most discussions begin with a number. Trillions owed, rising deficits, a ticking clock. But the biggest misunderstanding about government debt isn't the size of the number. It's what people think that number means. This video explains a misunderstood belief shared by voters, policymakers, and even many commentators across history. We'll look at why governments are often compared to households, why that comparison feels intuitive, and why it breaks down. We'll also explore how countries have carried enormous debts before without collapsing, and how debt is actually reduced in practice, not in theory. This isn't an argument for more or less debt. It's an explanation of how government debt really works, and why the fear surrounding it is often misplaced, while other risks are overlooked. The most common belief about government debt sounds reasonable. Eventually, the bill comes due. The logic is simple. Households can't borrow forever, and businesses can't borrow forever, so governments must face the same limit. This comparison is powerful because it's familiar, but it's also where the myth begins. Imagine a family that keeps borrowing to pay for groceries. Eventually, they run out of credit. They're forced to cut spending or default. Now imagine applying that story to a country. It feels obvious, it feels responsible, and it's deeply misleading. Governments differ from households in three critical ways. First, governments don't have fixed lifespans. They don't retire, and they don't stop earning income. Second, governments have the ability to tax. They don't rely on voluntary income alone. Third, and most importantly, governments issue the currency their debt is denominated in. That single fact changes everything. After World War II, Britain's government debt exceeded 250% of GDP. By household standards, Britain was bankrupt, but Britain didn't default, it didn't collapse, and it didn't pay off the debt in the way people imagine. Instead, the debt slowly shrank relative to the economy, not through repayment, but through growth, inflation, and time. Here is the biggest myth about government debt, that it must eventually be paid back in full. In practice, most government debt is rolled over, refinanced, inflated away, or reduced relative to the size of the economy. The debt rarely disappears, it becomes smaller in importance. When a government bond matures, it is usually replaced with a new one. Old debt becomes new debt, the system continues. What matters is not the absolute size of debt, but whether it can be serviced. And that depends on economic growth, inflation, interest rates, and confidence. Historically, government debt ends in one of four ways. 1. Growth outpaces debt. 2. Inflation reduces its real value. 3. Financial repression shifts the burden to savers. And 4. Default or restructuring. The first three are quiet, the fourth is loud. Most countries prefer quiet solutions. Another example is when the U.S. emerged from World War II with debt above 100% of GDP. That debt wasn't paid down through budget surpluses. It shrank because the economy grew rapidly, inflation was moderate, and interest rates were kept low. Savers bore part of the cost, debtors benefited. The adjustment was slow, legal, and politically manageable. The myth leads people to focus on the wrong danger. The real risk is not that governments will run out of money. The real risk is how debt is managed. High debt combined with low growth, political instability, foreign currency borrowing, or loss of trust can lead to crisis. Not because the number is large, but because the system holding it together breaks. Argentina in 2001 didn't collapse because it borrowed. It collapsed because its debt was denominated in foreign currency. It couldn't control monetary conditions, and confidence evaporated. Same tool, different structure, and very different outcome. The household analogy persists because it feels intuitive, encourages discipline, and fits political narratives, but it also obscures who actually pays. Government debt doesn't vanish. Its cost is distributed over time, often to savers through inflation and workers through slower wage growth. Asset owners are usually less impacted. The myth simplifies a complex redistribution into a moral story. Across history, large debts have been common after wars and crises. Collapse is the exception, not the rule. The adjustment mechanism matters more than the size. The question is never, will the debt be paid? The question is, who will bear the cost, and how quietly? The biggest myth about government debt is that it works like personal debt, but it doesn't. Governments don't face a final bill in the way households do. They face a series of choices about inflation, growth, interest rates, and distribution. Understanding this doesn't remove risk, but it does change where we should be looking. Because the danger isn't that the number is large, it's that we misunderstand what that number really represents. If this video helped you understand a common myth about government debt, subscribe for more economic history.